Hi, and welcome to our session. We are so happy that you all are here with us today, joining us for our session, which is about family and the holidays. For those of you that are new here, a session is a conversation amongst clinicians. We typically will come up or have a topic requested of a something mental health related that we would discuss in a typical therapy session. And here it's amongst two other clinicians where we all three get to talk and kind of conceptualize and problem solve and offer tips and suggestions of what we would typically discuss in a session with our clients. And so we're really happy to have you here. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Mandy Rourke, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in Austin, Texas. I am also one of the co-founders of Zession, which I'm here with my fellow co-founder, Sepna. I'll let you introduce yourself now.
Yeah, I'm Sapna Srivastav, like Mandy mentioned, fellow co-founder of Zesho, current registered marriage and family therapy intern, and current doctoral candidate in marriage and family therapy. Um, and joined by our wonderful colleague, Kendall. I'll let you introduce yourself as well, Kendall.
Yeah, I'm Kendall Campbell. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Austin, Texas, and I'm just excited to be here and talk about some of the stuff that I see pretty much starting November 1st, and it goes all the way to February for most people.
Yeah,
It's true. That's when we started thinking about a topic around the holidays. This seemed like the kind of go-to because of our work with clients when it comes to families and just relationships in general. And so, I mean, Kendall, you were already kind of alluding to this now, but this does become a hot topic pretty early on, starting like maybe even earlier than November 1st for some people, just the anticipation of like starting to hear the, holiday music or seeing the holiday decorations being put out and everything like that. So I'm excited that we're all here to kind of dive into it. And I'm just curious of just from the start, whenever I say family and the holidays, what's kind of the initial thing that comes up for you when you think about your clinical experience?
I primarily work with couples, and the biggest thing is couples coming in talking about where they're going to be going, whose family they're going to see, or for some of the newly established couples or relationships, are they going to strike it out on their own this year and create their own family experience? And it's that big battle between where do we go? And I like my mother-in-law, but I don't like your mother-in-law. And when we're around your brother, then this happens, and it's just all those wonderful little dramatic events. So just navigating that stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, that's what I was going to say was just navigating is what comes to mind. It's all, I mean,
Mhm.
that's, pretty consistent process in most of our sessions, I would say, but just there's so many dynamics to navigate, so many details to just kind of think through and process through and prepare for oftentimes. And it usually changes from year to year as well. And
Yeah.
I know for me, I think I've worked with a wide variety of clients, but I think a lot of whom, since I have a lot of experience with like emerging adults, I guess, so like, college students or like, early adulthood, have moved away, graduated college, and just kind of going back and like, they're growing, they're changing, and having to go back to a family dynamic where they might be considered the youngest child or the baby of the family and be treated as such, but really they're like growing into a full adult and like maybe starting to like start their own family. And so there's just all these different dynamics to consider and kind of support our clients through.
Mhm. It does. It's not just a toll on like the relationship or the family, potentially emotionally. I mean, happy holidays is not really happy for all, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, I spend a lot of time with individuals too, and kind of what you're describing, Setna, as far as like I'm doing so much of my own personal work and really feeling steady in my own individual life, or maybe even in my relationship. And now throw in family that I love and I care for, I may also have a different experience with, it adds so many different layers of trying to process, like, how do I get ready for this? I use the word impending because that sounds kind of negative, but just like, how do I get ready for what's about to come? But I think for me in my conversations, it's a lot of preparation of, how do you want the holidays to feel for you each year? In addition to all the ways that you feel and how we can process that too. So this will be a big topic, and I do, before we kind of dive even further in, want to clarify from the start here for anyone who is joining us that we are going to be breaking apart a whole very important topic around the holidays, which is grief in the holidays. We wanted to offer 2 separate sessions on that because it really does require a little bit more emotional planning and processing of kind of understanding what it feels like to grieve during the family holidays. But for today, we're going to kind of dive in and start talking about, what are some of the main things that you tend to discuss with clients in therapy?
Yeah, and I think that impending is a good word. It's usually the word that a lot of people and clients that come to me talk about is how are we going to navigate it, and trying to strike the balance between setting expectations that are good for yourself, both individually and for couples, and then leaning into some of the means or the avenues that they can have the best possible outcome for what they're looking for. It may not be happy-go-lucky, everyone hugs around the fire type thing, but just ensuring that they still remain intact by the end of it, right? I think one of the very first topics that I tend to address is expectation, right? Intent/expectation, right? What do you want from the holidays? And then we kind of lean into a few of the other topics, which I'm sure we'll lean into, but boundaries being another big one. But I'm curious, what are some of the things that you 2 talk about when you discuss intent and expectation with your clients? Is that something that you tend to lead or let them lead you?
Well, I love that topic because even actually, Mandy, as you were saying, like offering that question, I think you both kind of just offered it in different ways of like, what do you want your holiday to look like? I think that's such a fantastic question to kind of figure out what your own intention is of like what you personally can bring to any of the situations that you might find yourself in over the holidays, in the different various locations that you might be over the holidays in some cases.
Yeah.
And the expectations piece, I think, is also really important because you still also only have so much control over what it will ultimately look like. You can do as much as you can do on your end, but if you were going back into, a family dynamic in which they're not going to be used to kind of what you're bringing to the table, they're not going to be adjusting to it, they're not changing necessarily anything that they might be bringing to the table, then it might be very easy to kind of go back into previous patterns. And so that expectation piece is really key of like, you can do what you can do on your end, or you and your partner can do what y'all can do on your end for your little family. And it still may not necessarily look like what you hope it will be, but it's the hope that you carry in maybe not this year, but maybe baby steps towards the future dynamic you might want to establish potentially.
I love that. And I think it brings up the concept, and I share this with most of my clients too. I mean, it's a little technical or theoretical, I guess, and it's the going home again concept, which is exactly kind of what we're talking about, right? But I think it helps to name it sometimes with clients and even with ourselves, to say that this is a pretty typical part of our developmental process. Where, you leave your family of which you grew up with, you go out on your own, and there's this whole process of gaining that sense of identity and like, who am I and what really makes me happy in life and how do I want to live my life? And that can be challenged, or at least the theory is that when you go home again, some of that growth can be almost not taken away, whatever. That's not at all the case, but it almost feels like it's like could be like regression type feeling of like, whoa, like I went right back to my 16-year-old self. And when, so-and-so said something, like what I would have said as my, 40-year-old self came out very much and surprised me as my 16-year-old self. And I just want to make that really kind of normalize with my clients that you're not alone in that, because I think a lot of what you're saying, Sepna, is that, there's so much growth that can happen, in this process of starting to lead and live your own life, that maybe the hope or expectation to what Kendall is describing is that like our families are growing with us too, but if they're not alongside of us in that process, or they're not active in a process of growth on their own, it would be pretty reminiscent of kind of typical conversations that would have happened maybe in those adolescent types of years, which those are very different moments in time as you are an older adult. And it doesn't just stop at like 40. It can happen at 50. It can have like, it's just this constant kind of yo-yo of like, here I am, whoa, I've gone home again. What is different? What's the same? But it's part of the process, I think.
Completely. And I like that, Sepna, you talked about the power and control, the influence we feel we have, right? Bringing kind of both of those together. There's a suspension, kind of what you're talking about, of who I am, how I've grown when I come back into my family dynamic. And I think a lot of times we think that that is out of our control. And to some extent it is, right? I can try and be the mature adult who just made it to college or who graduated college, and come back and my mom still grabs and pinches my cheek and pulls me under her arm and that type of stuff. And I can't change her reaction, but I can change how I show up in it and how I want to be in those moments. And it's okay, I think, to your point, Mandy, that it's okay to find yourself with a bit of a blend, right? Acting a little bit younger to some extent, acting a little bit less like the self that you're coming into or that you feel you've become.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and kind of talking about the expectations piece again, I think another thing is just kind of giving yourself that like grace and compassion too, of like, it is okay if you kind of regress, like you said, Mandy, or kind of act a little bit younger. It is okay if it's not like, right immediately, like this growth and change that you've been fostering for maybe a couple years now, is not something that you're bringing into the interactions with your family right immediately. It's okay if you start to realize, like, in hindsight, maybe I could have done this differently. And that's like a first step. Like, it doesn't have to be everything all at once in this one trip necessarily. There's steps and layers, and that is perfectly okay as well.
Yeah.
I think I love hearing you say that. It makes me feel relieved, honestly, because I think sometimes at least in my experience with therapy, right? People are showing up and they're working really hard to experience change with themselves or with their relationships. And I think sometimes if you don't see your family that often, like many of my clients, they may live in different states or different countries. And so them having to, see them for the first time in maybe a year, especially with the pandemic. I mean, I had a lot, still I'm having conversations around, I haven't seen these people in the last 2 years, like so much has happened in my life. Like, how do I possibly kind of communicate everything or like bring them up to speed? And I think to how you're just describing it, it makes me feel or think about just let them in a little and let them in just enough that feels safe, which I think that actually opens up a whole conversation here around what are those little boundaries of like, what does feel emotionally safe for you? And this isn't coming from the place of like, you need to prove your worth or prove that you have changed or grown or anything like that. It's more of like, how do you want to let people in maybe to some of those changes that you've experienced? But it does come with, I think, some intentionality to your initial point, Kendall, around what are those boundaries? What types of boundaries? What does the boundary even mean as I bring it up here?
Yeah. I think one of the very first things that I do before I even get to the boundary part, or kind of leading up to the boundary, is setting expectation, but defining what the specific holiday means to you or means to the couple, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is, the common ones, it's time for love and compassion and affection and evolution. It's whatever it is for you, right? I think that helps define the expectation and the intent, but more than that, having that understanding also helps with establishing a boundary. We have a sort of a framework at that point. If all of a sudden family starts to feel, or being back home starts to feel something other than what I've defined it, or we have defined it as, well, then I can start to lean into boundaries. Boundaries can look like, they can be a variety of different things. They can be verbal boundaries, they can be physical boundaries, they can be time boundaries. Time, I think, is a huge boundary for a lot of people. Of I only want to be at this person's place for so long, or I want to be able to do X, Y, and Z. We have family and friends around here as well that I'd also like to engage in. Or I'm working with a lot of couples right now that they'll go see, who are children of divorced parents. Well, I want to go see mom and my family for 3 hours, the morning half of Thanksgiving, for example, and then dad for the evening half, right? Navigating those time boundaries as well is helps whenever you have that understanding, that that definition of what holiday is, or Thanksgiving, or whatever the event is.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and especially doing that for yourself as well as for like within a couple, as you were saying, is too. And like I know I've worked with a few, let's say, couple of couples. I've worked with a few couples who are kind of in the premarital stage, or are newly engaged, and they've maybe been, doing the holiday thing kind of either individually or like back and forth with each other's families for a while now. And now it's like for sure together, like we're establishing ourselves for our future. Like how do we set this boundary around not only like with ourselves and our families, with ourselves and like our future in-laws, but also like ourselves as a couple, so that that entity is also protected. And so I love that you brought up kind of understanding what the holiday means for each of you, because that, even just understanding that, can be really, really different. Like there might be some families who like they don't really care about the holidays as much. It's just another, fun excuse to get together, eat, drink, be merry. And for others, like there might be really religious undertones or meaning behind it that's really, really important within the family, or specific traditions that are really, really important, and are expected to be adhered to. And so really understanding what those boundaries are to be respected in between a couple as well as individually. And then also like within kind of all of these different dynamics within the families, depending on, I guess, who you're seeing for each holiday. It can be a lot, but the understanding the meaning and leading that to be what boundaries you want to set, I think, is really really key.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm curious because boundaries are something we talk about all the time in a variety of different facets, ways, in a variety of different realms or areas. Um, Arguably, family is one of the more difficult areas of an individual's life or a couple's life to set boundaries in, right? There's much more connection and meaning with that, not always, but most of the time. I'm curious how you to define for your couple, or how you explain what a boundary is, because I think over the past several years, especially, that term boundary has become a bit of a pop psychology term. And so I'm curious how you define that for your clients, and then how you kind of refine it for the specific need, in this case, with family around the holidays.
Oh, I like it. How do you define and refine boundaries? Two-part question.
Yep.
I think that is good to define, because it is a little catchy right now. Like, have boundaries, you need more boundaries. And to me, how I talk about boundaries with clients is a boundary is saying what you are going to do, or what is needed for you. It's a self-focus. So I'll give you an example of kind of tying some of this stuff together. If it's important to me over this holiday season to feel calm, at ease, and connected, kind of this peace and connection with family, then if I can go into family gatherings with that as my goal, then I can start thinking about like what I want to do in those moments in order to gain that calm presence, peace or connection, right? So in a situation where maybe things are feeling a little hectic, A boundary for me is not asking others to change their behavior. And that's one key differentiation with boundaries is boundaries has nothing to do about telling people what to do. And I think that could be misunderstood. It's more of, I am having a hard time with the way that this dynamic is unfolding. It's important to me to have calm sense of peace right now. So I am going to take a quick walk around the neighborhood after lunch and reset and gain. And it's nothing that has to be hostile at all. It's simply like, hey, y'all, I'm going to go take a quick walk. I'll be back. No conflict, but I'm saying this is what I need and this is what I'm going to do. And as Brene Brown has called before, we don't want to be boundary bullies, which is coming on super harsh and strong of, well, if y'all can't calm down at the dinner table, I'm going for a walk. It's like, well, that's opening up a whole different layer of dynamic, right? So I'll kind of pause there because I'd love to hear what y'all have to say too. I mean, I think this is such a rich conversation.
Yeah, I take a similar approach because I think, like you said, Kendall, it has become such a pop culture thing, and like I think it's fantastic in a lot of ways of like encouraging people to stand up for themselves, to kind of establish what they want for themselves. But often it can become convoluted into like, I'm not going to stand for you. Well, I guess that is still like a boundary for yourself of but it's not expecting someone else to change. It is something like establishing what you're going to bring to the table and stand by and respect for yourself and expect other people to respect. But if they won't, remove yourself from the situation, like letting this is what I need and want for myself. And if it can't be respected, this is the action that I'm going to take. And ideally it's a you action, not a I'm going to lock you in your room kind of situation.
Yeah.
It's sometimes appropriate for sure, but mom needs to go take a break situation a little more so. And so I think there's that. I think I also try in some ways to establish like there's the different types of boundaries, right? So there's kind of what we call like more rigid boundaries, which are they can be a little more aggressive, but it's like kind of all or nothing, like it's my way or no way at all. And so that can kind of lead to conflict pretty easily in that, it can lead to cut off a little more out of a reaction rather than like intention. And when I say cut off, like that, like cutting off communication, like not being present with someone. Or on the flip side, it could be kind of a loose boundary that's not very structured. Maybe you don't really know what you need. And so you're kind of going along with the need to be, accepted or loved or, valued, affirmed by others, and not really keeping your own boundaries in order to kind of receive that need in some instances. And so not really stating your needs, being a little more passive, maybe overly accommodating, rather than, allowing yourself to recognize you're allowed to have needs, you're allowed to have wants, and you're allowed to respect them and ask other people to respect them, and then take care of yourself if that's not the case, and kind of advocate for yourself in that way and stand by yourself in that way. And so that definitely can be refined in multiple different contexts for, families versus couples versus, I just need to not maybe attend a family function this time around. But I mean, that's definitely, it can be really individualized for sure.
Yeah. So it's actually nice to hear because the language that you two use is more or less an iteration of the same thing that I talk about with my clients. The one part that I'm most likely going to start to incorporate is when I define boundaries, I highlight that it is an internal thing, right? It's something that I'm defining for myself. But I try and reinstill the notion that this is where we have a degree of influence and power and control. I can't change necessarily how people react to it. That's the hope, and I think the ideal. I think when we talk about as kind of modern age and media has talked about boundaries, we think that We tend to go to the extremes, right? Ultimatums or rigid boundaries, right? Is that the outcome is going to be X. And if the outcome is not X, well, then all of a sudden I don't feel as if I have power and control. And it misses the point, right? If I set for myself that, to Mandy, to your point, I want to feel safe, or I want to feel connected, or I want to feel happy, right? There are ways in which I can do something to accommodate that. That can be drastic. It can be leaving. It can be not attending a function. A lot of times too, it can just be as simple as expressing your thoughts or your emotions, right? This is how I feel, or this is what I'm thinking, right? We can't control intent, or how intent, I should say, is perceived. But I think highlighting that there's a spectrum, I think, is super helpful, because most people, at least the clients that I work with, think, well, I'm setting a boundary, so I'm trying to change behavior modification. And a lot of times the only way we think that is ultimatums, right? If you don't do this, I will do X, right? Highlighting that the most effective boundaries, again, what I do is highlighting that the most effective boundaries are ones that are collaborative, right? And the way that I try and help people accomplish that is teaching the individuals or the couples that I'm working with to take the most difficult step, I think, of being vulnerable first, right? This is my experience and these are my feelings. And the fable and the big cliche, when I feel, when you do X or Y, or when I perceive X or Y, it impacts me or us in this way, right? And curiosity. I think the next big thing is that for me is that a lot of the conversation tends to stop there. Well, they didn't hear me, or they're not willing to change. And I always ask the question of, well, how do you know that they're not willing to change? And how did that stop? What did you ask them? What do you know why they say or do the things that they do? No. Okay, well, be curious, right? Help me understand how your coming to greet me at the door in one way is different than me wanting to be received in a different way, right? Mm-hmm. I think all of that together really allows people to see, gives them, again, more power and influence over a situation, giving them a bit more freedom, and hopefully a little less anxiety or stress around that notion that I think a lot of us have of, oh, I'm going to be stuck in the holidays.
I think, I mean, you're bringing up a lot here that we could probably create another 10 sessions all the way around of like this boundary over the holidays and this boundary. But one thing I really want to highlight in what you're saying is this, anytime I hear curiosity, my ears perk up. And I think that is such a solid tool during the holidays is it's curiosity. And maybe I would even extend that into from a place of just kind of watching and observing, not watching with like criticism of like, oh, just as expected, or when's Aunt so-and-so going to do, whatever, insert whatever scenario there. I don't want to say anything.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of those things where it's like, if I don't know, let's say, like, I don't really know what my boundaries are yet, or I just know that when I go home, I leave feeling, less positive than when I arrived, or when I'm in those settings, I'm feeling anxious, or I'm even noticing like physical changes of just discomfort, that I think it's just starting to be curious in the process. Because, as we're talking about this right now, I mean, we are definitely talking about this from the lens of people that we've been working with, and they've had maybe insight over our conversations around their experiences. And so, for those of people that are listening that maybe haven't had that choice, it's like, it's okay to not really know what your boundaries are. But I think maybe the helpful solution could be, but this year you can go into all of these holiday gatherings with just these curiosity goggles on, if you will, where as I say goggles, it almost just feels like a little bit of a shield, not in a combative way. You can still see through these goggles, but it's like a layer of protection that it's like, I have, space between me and what is happening versus, this is a part of the boundaries versus this all being very merged or kind of blended together. Like, I have a say, I get to come and kind of decide like what would have been better for next time when, so-and-so brought up my weight, for instance. this is what I want to say. I didn't say that, but what was going on with me? And like, what would be something I could say next time in the event someone said something that was hurtful or unkind? So I just kind of felt the need to say that too, because I think, as therapists and as people, we definitely want to solve and have a really good plan. And that is certainly part of why we started having this conversation today. But at the same time, it's like, it's okay to kind of expect the process to unfold as you just kind of figure it out too, with curiosity, of course, as the main driver there. So again, we could keep talking for so long on this, and we might even have to schedule a follow-up session. But I do think maybe as we're kind of wrapping up this one segment of our conversation around family and the holidays, maybe it would be helpful if y'all have any like just go-to tips. I know you're already sharing them, but if there's anything that you haven't shared yet that you think would be helpful to leave our listeners with, what would you add?
I think my thoughts are still kind of around exactly what you're saying of like kind of where do you start in this process of even figuring out your boundaries. Even if you kind of have had an idea previously, like, our lives, our context, our situations change, and so our needs change, and therefore our boundaries are often going to change. And so it's okay if you don't really know, like just take whatever baby steps are right for you, or in some cases baby leaps are more appropriate if baby steps feel uncomfortable too. Of what is my need, what is my reaction in this situation, kind of even just observing after the fact, even if you can't even observe in the moment, just being able to like give yourself a little time after the fact, whether it's with a therapist or just by yourself or with a trusted friend, of like, this is what I was feeling. What did I need in that moment? How could I have advocated what I needed in that moment? Maybe how can I phrase it in the future, and kind of like trying to use the I statements. And, if that's not respected, then, what step would I take next? And again, coming from that perspective of like, what can I do that is in my control, and recognizing like anyone else's reactions to your boundaries are not yours. Those are theirs. And so not having to feel responsible for anyone else's reaction when you are setting a boundary for yourself. You're allowed to set that, and it's allowed to be respected. And if it's not, that's something that they deal with, and you can kind of deal with processing through your reaction to maybe their reaction. But much more than that, that's in their little circle of control, and not necessarily yours.
Yeah. I don't necessarily have a lasting tip per se. I think that we've more or less broached the massive topic at the very least. But the thing that, it's a bit cliche and it's a bit normal, but I think it's so important, it bears repeating. One of the very first things I tell clients, especially in these areas, is that they're not alone in this. This is so unbelievably common. It's so common to call it common. It's not even common is an understatement, right? But it's one of those things that we feel so isolated whenever we talk about it. And I would love for people, if they took nothing else away, to know that that if they talk to one person and just say, I'm concerned, or I'm worried, or I'm scared, or annoyed, or frustrated, or I'm X about the upcoming holidays, that I can almost promise there's a high probability that their friend or whoever they're talking to is going to go, yeah, let me tell you about what I'm about to walk into. And all of a sudden you have a dialogue, and you can, that friend, be it a trusted professional or just a confidant, will have the ability to walk into some of these things to prompt observation or mindfulness, or if nothing else, just have a shoulder to cry on or lean on or be there for you. I mean, it's huge during the holidays.
Agreed. And I am just so grateful that it doesn't seem too cliche to me, truly, because I, being in the seat of the therapist, do recognize a lot of anxiety that clients feel of like, just some of the messaging, even on TV, it's like, you kind of feel like you have to be with friends, you have to be with family, you have to be having this joyous, connected time. And
Yeah.
that is the case for some, and that's wonderful to celebrate and enjoy. But when it isn't, you're not alone in that. And I do appreciate you bringing that up, because it can feel a little isolating sometimes. And it's like, I don't maybe want to spend time with my family. I want to do a Friendsgiving instead, or I want to do just like a
Yeah.
cozy day on the couch watching Christmas movies all day, or whatever it may be with your version. But this was popping up in my mind as we've been kind of having the conversation, as like a closing thought of like, rather than it being like happy holidays, it's more of like, how do you make your holiday your happy, and whatever version that might look like, and just kind of keeping the attention on you as a person, and trusting that your feelings are important here, and they're not just, coming to the surface for no reason. There's a lot of impact that we have a lot of impact from our experiences with those that we are close with, whether that be family or even close friend groups. So kind of be patient, be kind with yourself in the process as you do try to find your happy, because it is a little bit of work, as we've been talking about today. So
Yeah.
just a little bit. But what's exciting about these sessions, y'all, I really enjoyed our conversation today around this. And as mentioned at the very beginning, we will be picking up with the grief and the family holidays in a separate segment. And we also have the option on our Zesho website for you to be able to request sessions too. So if you listen today and you're like, really want them to, refine some of what we were talking about a little bit more on very, very specific topics, please do reach out and suggest, because we are here to keep the conversations going and try to offer as many helpful tips as we can possibly find in these chats with each other.
Yeah.
All
Yeah, and
right.
if you have any follow-up questions as well, feel free to add those too. Any kind of thoughts or questions, we'd love to hear it.
Sounds good. All right. Well, we'll stay tuned for what's to come around holidays.